My parents said the greatest gift for your sister's wedding is if you disappear from our family forever. I didn't beg, packed my things, took the keys, walked out the door, closing like a final punctuation mark the next day. Sold the apartment, froze the joint account. I'm Sarah, and this is the story of how my family's cruelty became their downfall. What happened 4 years ago changed everything, but what happened last week? That was justice. Growing up, I always knew Madison was the golden child. She was 2 years younger, prettier according to everyone, and somehow everything she touched turned to gold in my parents' eyes. Robert and Linda Morrison made it clear from day one that Madison was their little princess, and I was just there. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't some tragic Cinderella figure. I had friends, decent grades, and eventually built a successful career in marketing. But no matter what I accomplished, it never seemed to measure up to Madison's effortless perfection. When I graduated summa cum laude from college, they threw me a small dinner. When Madison got accepted to community college, they threw a party for 50 people. The pattern continued into our 20s. I landed a 6-figure job at a prestigious firm, bought my own condo, traveled to 15 countries. Madison bounced between part-time jobs and moved back in with our parents twice. Guess who got praised for being family-oriented while I was criticized for being too independent and career-focused? But I kept trying. I kept showing up to family dinners, kept sending thoughtful gifts for birthdays and holidays, kept hoping that someday they'd see me as worthy of their love and respect. I was an idiot. The breaking point came 4 years ago when Madison announced her engagement to Trevor, some guy she'd been dating for 8 months. You'd think she discovered the cure for cancer based on my parents' reaction. Immediately, wedding planning consumed our entire family's existence. Every conversation revolved around Madison's dress, Madison's venue, Madison's flowers, Madison's guest list. I offered to help with planning, offered to pay for parts of the wedding since I knew money was tight for them. Madison barely acknowledged my offers, and my parents acted like I was being intrusive. But I pushed down the hurt and kept trying to be supportive. 2 weeks before the wedding, everything imploded. I was at my parents' house helping with some last-minute decorations when Madison had a complete meltdown. Apparently, some distant cousin had RSVP'd yes and was bringing A+1, which meant they were 1 chair short at the reception. She was sobbing dramatically about how her perfect day was ruined. Maybe some people just won't come, I suggested reasonably. It happens at every wedding. Madison whipped around and glared at me with pure venom. This is all your fault. If you weren't taking up space, we'd have enough room for everyone important. I stared at her, confused. What are you talking about? I'm your sister. Barely, she spat. You don't even feel like family anymore. You're just this awkward presence that makes everyone uncomfortable. The words stung, but I tried to stay calm. Madison, you're stressed about the wedding. Let's just figure out the seating. No. She screamed. I'm sick of pretending. I'm sick of having you at family events where you just hover around looking miserable and making everyone else feel bad for having fun. My parents, Robert and Linda, had been watching this exchange in silence. I turned to them, expecting them to tell Madison she was being cruel, that she was out of line. Instead, my father cleared his throat uncomfortably. Sarah, honey, maybe Madison has a point. The room went dead silent except for Madison sniffling. Excuse me? I whispered. My mother, Linda, wouldn't meet my eyes. You have to admit, you've always been difficult. At family gatherings, you never seem happy. You make comments about our traditions, you don't participate in conversations. I participate plenty, I said, my voice stronger now. Just because I don't squeal over every little thing doesn't mean I'm difficult. See? Madison pointed at me triumphantly. Even now you're being defensive and negative. Robert stood up and walked over to me. For a moment, I thought he was going to comfort me, to tell Madison she was being ridiculous. Instead, he put his hands on my shoulders and looked me dead in the eyes. Sarah, we've been talking, and we think maybe it would be better if you didn't come to the wedding. The world tilted sideways. What? Just hear us out, Linda said quickly. This is Madison's special day, and we want everything to be perfect for her. With your energy. There, we're worried about drama. My energy? I repeated numbly. What drama? When have I ever caused drama? You don't have to cause it, Madison said smugly. You just bring this cloud of negativity wherever you go. People can feel it. I looked between the three of them, these people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and I saw the truth written on their faces. They didn't just want me gone from the wedding. They wanted me gone, period. Fine, I said quietly. If that's how you feel, I won't come to the wedding. Good, Madison said with obvious relief. But Robert wasn't done. He exchanged a look with Linda, and I saw some kind of silent communication pass between them. Then he took a deep breath. Actually, Sarah, we've been thinking about this for a while now. Maybe it would be better for everyone if you took a step back from the family entirely. What does that mean? I asked, though I was pretty sure I knew. Linda finally looked at me, her eyes cold as winter. It means that the greatest gift you could give your sister for her wedding is if you just disappeared from our lives. Forever. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Madison was watching me with anticipation, waiting for me to break down and beg them not to cast me out. My parents looked uncomfortable but determined, like parents who were putting down a sick pet for its own good. But I didn't break down. Something inside me just clicked off. Okay, I said calmly. They all looked surprised. Madison's face fell slightly, like she'd been deprived of a show she was looking forward to. Okay? Robert repeated. Okay. If that's what you want, that's what you'll get. I walked over to the coat closet and grabbed my jacket. I need to get something from upstairs. I went up to my childhood bedroom, where I kept a few personal items in the closet, and grabbed a small wooden box that contained some jewelry my grandmother had left me. My real grandmother, Linda's mother, who had actually loved me. Then I walked back downstairs to where my family was still standing in the living room, looking uncertain now. I'll need a few days to arrange some things, I said in the same calm tone. But you'll get your wish, Sarah, Linda started, but I held up my hand. No, you've made yourselves very clear. Madison wants me gone, and you two agree. So I'll be gone. But just so we're all clear on what's happening here, you're choosing to lose a daughter who has never done anything but try to love you, because your other daughter throws tantrums when she doesn't get her way. Madison opened her mouth to protest, but I kept talking. I'm not going to argue with you or try to change your minds. You've shown me exactly how much I mean to this family, and I believe you. So consider this goodbye. I walked to the front door and turned back one last time. Oh, and Madison? Congratulations on your wedding. I hope it's everything you dreamed of. Then I walked out, closing the door behind me like the final punctuation mark on a sentence I never wanted to finish writing. The next day, I started making calls. First, I called the real estate agent who had helped me buy my condo 3 years earlier. The market was hot, and my place was in a desirable area. She thought we could have it listed and sold within a month. Then I called my bank. See, here's something my family didn't know about me. I was actually much better with money than they'd ever realized. While Madison had been bouncing between jobs and running up credit card debt, I'd been building a substantial savings account and investment portfolio. But there was one account that was going to be a problem, the joint account I shared with my father. We'd opened it years ago when I was in college, meant for emergency purposes. Over the years, it had become the account my parents used for family expenses, vacations, holiday gifts, home repairs. I'd been the primary contributor to it, depositing money regularly because I wanted to help my family. There was currently about $47,000 in that account. I called the bank and explained that I needed to withdraw my contributions from the joint account immediately. Since I was the primary contributor and could document the deposits, I was able to withdraw $45,000 of my own money, leaving just $2,000 that represented their contributions over the years. The bank representative explained that this would trigger an automatic hold on the remaining funds for 72 hours while they verified the transaction. Perfect. Madison's wedding was in 8 days, and they'd need that money for final vendor payments in the next few days. By day 3 after our confrontation, I put my condo on the market and it already had 2 interested buyers. I'd also started applying for jobs in other cities. Seattle looked promising. I had contacts there from my current company's Seattle office, and they'd been trying to recruit me for months to transfer. My phone had been ringing constantly since the day after I left my parents' house. First it was Linda, leaving concerned voicemails about how I was overreacting and we should talk this through as a family. Then Robert, trying to take a firmer tone and telling me I was being childish and spiteful. Then Madison, alternating between apologies that sounded fake and accusations that I was trying to ruin her wedding with drama. I didn't answer any of their calls. On day 5, Linda showed up at my office. She looked haggard and desperate, which was unusual for my always perfectly put-together mother. Sarah, we need to talk, she said when she cornered me in the lobby during my lunch break. No, we don't, I replied calmly. You made it very clear that you don't want me in your lives. I'm respecting that wish. I didn't mean forever, she said, grabbing my arm. We were all upset about the wedding stress, but your family. This is ridiculous. I gently removed her hand from my arm. I'm not family, Linda. You made that very clear. Madison said I barely count as her sister, and you and Robert agreed that everyone would be happier if I just disappeared. So that's what I'm doing. You can't just disappear. You're our daughter. Funny, it didn't sound that way when you were all telling me to get out of your lives. Linda's eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. It was like watching a stranger cry. The wedding is in a week, she said desperately. Madison wants to invite you after all. She realizes she made a mistake. No, she doesn't, I said flatly. She's panicking because she's realizing there might be consequences to her behavior, but she doesn't actually want me there. None of you do. And you know what? I finally believe you. I started to walk away, but she called after me. Sarah, please. We can't access the money for the final wedding payments. I took out loans expecting that money to be available. I turned back to her with a pleasant smile. That's not my problem anymore. You wanted me to disappear, remember? That includes my financial contributions to this family. The money I withdrew was mine anyway. But the wedding will go on without me, exactly as you all wanted. Goodbye, Linda. That afternoon, I accepted a job offer in Seattle. My new position came with a 20% salary increase and a signing bonus that would more than cover my moving expenses. My last day at my current job would be the day after Madison's wedding. The phone calls became increasingly frantic as the wedding approached. Robert left angry voicemails calling me vindictive and cruel. Madison left sobbing messages begging me to fix the bank account situation. Linda sent text after text promising that things would be different if I would just stop this madness. But it was too late. They'd shown me who they really were, and I believed them. The wedding went on as scheduled. I know this because my former co-worker Jessica, whose cousin was invited, sent me updates throughout the day. Apparently, they'd had to drastically scale back the reception due to budget constraints, and Madison had spent most of the day in tears. Not because she missed me, but because her perfect wedding had turned into a modest affair with cash bar drinks and a cake from the grocery store instead of the elaborate dessert table she'd planned. 6 weeks later, I was in Seattle, settled into a beautiful apartment with a view of the Sound. My condo had sold, and I'd used part of the profits as a down payment on the Seattle apartment. The $45,000 I'd withdrawn from the joint account was now in my personal savings. I blocked all my family's phone numbers and social media accounts. When Linda somehow got my new work number and called, I had my assistant take a message that I was too busy to take personal calls during work hours. When Robert showed up at my building, the doorman turned him away because he wasn't on my approved visitor list. For 6 months, I lived in blissful silence. I made new friends, dated a wonderful guy named Marcus, traveled to places I'd always wanted to see. I was happier than I'd ever been in my life. Then the real consequences started showing up. Jessica kept me informed about my family's situation through mutual friends and her cousin who still lived in our hometown. Apparently, without my regular contributions to family finances, my parents were struggling more than they'd let on. They'd taken out loans to pay for Madison's wedding, expecting to pay them back with money from the joint account that they no longer had access to. Madison's marriage was rocky from the start. Trevor, it turned out, had expected to marry into a family with money, and was not pleased to discover that the financial stability he'd observed was largely dependent on my contributions. When Madison couldn't contribute financially to their household because she couldn't hold down a steady job, the fight started. But the real kicker came 14 months after I'd left, when Linda's father, my grandfather, passed away suddenly. He'd been the family patriarch, the one person who'd always been kind to me and made me feel valued during family gatherings. His will was read 2 days after the funeral I wasn't informed about. Jessica called me that evening, practically vibrating with excitement. Sarah, you need to sit down for this, she said. Why? What happened? Your grandfather left you everything. I nearly dropped the phone. What do you mean, everything? I mean everything. The house, the investments, the life insurance payout, even his classic car collection. Madison got $5,000 and a letter saying he hoped she'd learn the value of treating family better. Your parents got nothing except a note saying they'd shown their true character and he was disappointed in them. The inheritance was worth close to $2 million. Apparently, my grandfather had been paying attention during those final family gatherings before I'd left. He'd witnessed how they treated me, how they dismissed my contributions and took my presence for granted. In his final months, he quietly changed his will and left me a letter explaining his decision. The letter was forwarded to me through his lawyer. In it, he wrote about how proud he was of the woman I'd become, how he'd watched me handle my family's rejection with grace and dignity, and how he wanted to make sure I had the resources to build whatever life I chose for myself. He also mentioned that he hoped someday my family would realize what they'd lost, but that I shouldn't wait for that day to be happy. Reading that letter was the first time I'd cried since the day I'd walked out of my parents' house. Of course, my family's reaction was predictable. The phone calls started again, from numbers I hadn't blocked. Text messages from mutual acquaintances, trying to guilt me into sharing the inheritance because families should stick together. Madison even had the audacity to send me a message through a friend saying that Grandpa obviously hadn't been thinking clearly in his final days and the ethical thing to do would be to split the money evenly. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I used a portion of the inheritance to put a down payment on a beautiful house in the hills outside Seattle, and invested the rest wisely. I also donated $50,000 to a charity that supported estranged adult children, because I'd learned I wasn't alone in my experience. For the next 2 years, I lived my life peacefully. I got promoted twice, Marcus and I got engaged, and I built chosen family with people who actually valued me. My former family seemed to accept that I was never coming back to them. During this time, Jessica continued to be my unofficial source of information about my family's deteriorating situation. She didn't seek out this role, but given that she lived in the same small town and her social circles occasionally overlapped with theirs, she inevitably heard things. And honestly, I think she found the whole situation fascinating from a psychological perspective. "Your sister got fired from another job," Jessica told me during one of our monthly catch-up calls. Apparently she was caught using company time to plan some kind of side business selling essential oils. I wasn't surprised. Madison had always been the type to look for get-rich-quick schemes rather than putting in actual work. "How's Trevor handling it?" "Not well. My cousin saw them having a screaming match in the grocery store parking lot last week. Something about money and responsibility." Jessica paused. "Sarah, I have to ask, do you ever feel bad about how things turned out for them?" It was a question I'd asked myself many times over the past 2 years. Did I feel guilty that my absence had contributed to their financial struggles? Did I regret not being there to help Madison through her obvious personal issues? The answer was always the same: no. They made their choice, I told Jessica. They decided they'd be happier without me, and they're getting exactly what they asked for. The fact that they're not as happy as they expected isn't my responsibility. But Jessica's updates painted a picture of a family in steady decline. Robert had been forced to take early retirement when his company downsized, and his pension wasn't as substantial as he'd hoped. Linda had gone back to work part-time at a department store, something she clearly found humiliating given how much pride she'd always taken in being a lady of leisure. Madison's marriage was crumbling, and without my financial safety net, my parents were struggling to help her the way they always had. The house, the family home where I'd grown up, was starting to show signs of deferred maintenance. Jessica mentioned seeing peeling paint and an overgrown lawn whenever she drove past. Little things that added up to a picture of people who were just barely keeping their heads above water. Meanwhile, my life in Seattle was flourishing in ways I'd never imagined possible. The promotion I'd received 6 months after the inheritance came with a leadership role that challenged me in the best possible ways. I was managing a team of 12 people and overseeing marketing campaigns for major tech companies. My colleagues respected my expertise and valued my input, something I'd never fully experienced before. Marcus and I had bought a cabin in the mountains where we spent weekends hiking and planning our future together. He was everything my family had never been: supportive, encouraging, genuinely interested in my thoughts and feelings. When I told him about my childhood, about how I'd always felt like I was competing for scraps of attention and affection, he was horrified. "They treated you like you were lucky to be included," he said one evening as we sat by the fireplace in our cabin. "But Sarah, you're not lucky to be included anywhere. People are lucky to have you." It sounds simple, but hearing those words from someone who genuinely meant them was revolutionary. For the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to be valued not for what I could provide or how little space I took up, but simply for being myself. I also started therapy during this period, something I'd been avoiding for years because I'd convinced myself that my family problems weren't serious enough to warrant professional help. Dr. Martinez helped me understand the patterns of emotional manipulation and scapegoating that had defined my childhood, and more importantly, she helped me see that my decision to cut contact had been an act of self-preservation, not selfishness. "Healthy families don't tell their children to disappear forever," she said during one of our sessions. "The fact that you were able to recognize how toxic that dynamic was and remove yourself from it shows remarkable emotional intelligence and strength." Through therapy, I also came to understand why Madison had always been so threatened by me. As the younger child who struggled academically and professionally, she'd learned that the only way to secure our parents' attention and resources was to position herself as the victim of my success. Every achievement of mine became evidence of how I was somehow taking something away from her. "It's a zero-sum mentality," Dr. Martinez explained. In her mind, your success meant her failure, your happiness meant her misery. She couldn't celebrate your wins because she'd been conditioned to see them as her losses. Understanding the psychology behind my family's behavior didn't make their actions hurt any less, but it did help me feel more confident in my decision to stay away from them. They weren't going to change because the system they built worked for them, or at least, it had worked until I removed myself from the equation. Around this time, I also started volunteering with a support group for estranged adult children. I'd found the group online during my first year in Seattle, but it took me a while to work up the courage to attend meetings. When I finally did, I discovered that my experience was far from unique. There was David, whose parents had disowned him for being gay and then tried to reconnect years later when they needed someone to care for them in their old age. There was Maria, who'd been written out of her family's will for marrying someone they didn't approve of, only to have them come crawling back when they realized she was their only financially stable child. There was Jennifer, whose siblings had convinced their parents that she was mentally unstable because she'd called out their emotional abuse. Hearing their stories made me realize that family estrangement often follows predictable patterns. The scapegoated child is pushed away, then blamed for the problems their absence creates. The family struggles without their contributions, emotional, financial, or otherwise, but instead of acknowledging their mistake, they double down on the narrative that the estranged child is the problem. They want you gone until they need you, Jennifer said during one meeting. Then suddenly you're selfish for staying away. I started sharing my own story in these meetings, and the group's validation was incredibly healing. These were people who understood what it felt like to be told you were the problem, to have your legitimate grievances dismissed as overreaction or holding grudges. They understood the guilt and confusion that comes with cutting ties with family, and they helped me see that choosing your own well-being over toxic relationships isn't selfish, it's necessary. As my second year in Seattle progressed, I began to feel something I'd never experienced before: genuine peace. I wasn't constantly bracing for criticism or trying to prove my worth. I wasn't walking on eggshells or monitoring my words to avoid setting someone off. I was just living. It was remarkable how much mental energy I'd been spending on managing my family's emotions and expectations. Marcus proposed during a weekend trip to Vancouver, and when I called Jessica to share the news, she was thrilled but also gave me an update that cast a shadow over my happiness. "I hate to bring this up during such a happy time," she said, "but I thought you should know, your dad had some kind of health scare last month. Heart palpitations or something. He's fine now, but Linda was apparently calling around to all their old contacts, trying to find your number." My first instinct was a flash of worry, the kind of automatic response that decades of conditioning had ingrained in me. Then came the guilt, the voice in my head that whispered maybe I should reach out, maybe family was more important than my hurt feelings, maybe I was being too harsh. But then I remembered sitting in that living room 3 years ago, listening to my father tell me that the greatest gift I could give my sister was to disappear forever. I remembered the relief on their faces when I agreed. I remembered all the evidence that they'd been happier without me. "Did she find it?" I asked Jessica. "I don't think so. And honestly, Sarah, I don't think she tried very hard. I think it was more about the gesture, you know? Being able to tell herself she'd attempted to reach out." That made sense. Linda had always been good at performative gestures that made her feel better about herself without actually requiring her to change her behavior or take real responsibility. Marcus and I set our wedding date for the following spring and began planning a celebration that would reflect our values and priorities. We wanted something intimate but meaningful, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about us. The guest list was small but carefully curated: friends who'd become family, colleagues who'd become friends, Marcus's wonderful parents who'd welcomed me with open arms. It struck me that our wedding would have everything Madison's hadn't: genuine joy, financial stability, and guests who were there because they wanted to celebrate with us, not because they felt obligated. There would be no drama, no last-minute panics about money, no family members making passive-aggressive comments or competing for attention. During this time, I also made some financial decisions that would prove significant later. The inheritance from my grandfather had been wisely invested, and the returns were substantial enough that I was able to purchase several rental properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods. I also started a small scholarship fund for first-generation college students who'd been estranged from their families, kids who were trying to build better lives without a safety net of family support. The scholarship fund was particularly meaningful to me because I remembered how isolating it had been in college to hear classmates talk about their family's support and involvement while knowing that mine saw my education as something that was taking me away from them rather than something to be proud of. I named the fund after my grandfather, and the first recipient was a young woman named Ashley whose parents had disowned her for refusing to drop out of school to care for her younger siblings. Reading her essay about determination and self-reliance, I saw echoes of my own journey. By the time my third year in Seattle was ending, I felt like I'd built something genuinely beautiful. My career was thriving, my relationship with Marcus was strong and healthy, and I'd created a chosen family of people who saw and appreciated my authentic self. I'd also developed hobbies and interests that I'd never had time for when I was constantly managing family drama. I learned to rock climb, took up photography, and even started writing short stories. But apparently, Financial desperation has a way of making people persistent. 6 months ago, I received an official-looking letter from a law firm back home. My father was suing me for financial elder abuse and unjust enrichment, claiming that I'd manipulated my grandfather into changing his will and that I had improperly withdrawn money from the joint account that was meant for family expenses. The lawsuit was clearly desperate. They'd filed it just under the 2-year statute of limitations for will contests, but it was still stressful to deal with. Even worse, Madison had joined the lawsuit, claiming that my abandonment of the family had caused emotional distress that led to her depression and job instability. Yes, she and Trevor had divorced, and she was trying to claim that it was somehow my fault because my absence had created family instability. The legal documents were full of lies and manipulations. They painted me as a vindictive daughter who had cruelly cut off contact with my loving family over minor disagreements. They claimed I'd improperly taken money that was meant for family emergencies and used it to spite them. They even suggested that I'd somehow coerced my grandfather into changing his will while he was grieving my absence. Reading those papers, I felt that same cold click that had happened 3 years ago when they told me to disappear forever. It was time for the nuclear option. I'd kept records of everything, you see. Screenshots of text messages, saved voicemails, emails, even a few recordings from the day they kicked me out. Thank God for smartphones with voice memos. I'd also kept meticulous financial records showing exactly how much I'd contributed to family expenses over the years and how the joint account had been used. But more importantly, I kept in touch with Jessica, who had been documenting my family's behavior through her cousin and other mutual friends who witnessed their public comments and social media posts about being better off without me. I hired the best family law attorney in Seattle, a woman named Patricia Chen who specialized in cases involving family abuse and manipulation. When I showed her all my evidence, her eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "They picked the wrong person to mess with," she said with a predatory smile. "We're not just going to defend against this lawsuit, we're going to destroy them." Patricia's strategy was brilliant. Instead of just defending against their claims, we filed a counter-suit for defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We also petitioned the court to make public all communications related to the original incident, including the recordings I had of them telling me to disappear forever. The evidence was devastating. Audio recordings of Madison calling me names and saying I wasn't really family. Robert and Linda agreeing that everyone would be happier if I just disappeared. Text messages from Linda admitting that they'd taken me for granted financially. Screenshots of Madison's social media posts celebrating my absence from her wedding. But the most damaging piece of evidence was something I'd forgotten I had until Patricia asked me to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb. A few months after I'd moved to Seattle, Madison had gotten drunk and sent me a long, rambling email detailing how much better the family dynamic was without me there, how she'd always felt like she was competing with me for their parents' attention, and how she was glad I'd finally gotten the hint and left them alone. She'd ended the email by saying that she hoped I'd stay gone because coming back would just ruin the peace they'd finally found. That email alone was enough to destroy their entire narrative about being a loving family devastated by my cruel abandonment. The case went to mediation first, as required by the court. When that failed because my family refused any reasonable settlement, we proceeded to a hearing. Patricia had warned me that my family might try to make a scene, so I was prepared. What I wasn't prepared for was how completely broken they looked. Robert had aged what looked like 10 years. His hair was gray now, and he'd lost weight in an unhealthy way. Linda looked desperate and hollow-eyed, clutching a tissue box and shooting me pleading looks across the courtroom. And Madison. Madison looked exactly like the spoiled brat she'd always been, but now with an edge of panic because her comfortable life was falling apart. Their lawyer was clearly working with a shoestring budget and hadn't prepared adequately. He tried to paint them as the victims of a vindictive daughter's revenge scheme, but every argument he made was immediately countered by audio recordings, screenshots, or documented evidence of their actual behavior. When the judge listened to the recording of them telling me to disappear forever during the hearing, I watched my family's faces crumble. There was no way to spin those words as loving or supportive. There was no way to claim they'd been taken out of context. The coup de grace came when Patricia presented Jessica's testimony and the documented evidence she'd collected. Jessica had screenshots from mutual friends showing social media posts where Madison had celebrated my absence, and testimony from several people who'd heard my parents say they were relieved I was out of their lives. The judge was clearly frustrated with their claims. He dismissed their lawsuit and ruled in favor of my counter-suit, awarding me damages for defamation and emotional distress. The amount was substantial enough that it would wipe out what was left of their savings. But he wasn't done. In his final remarks, the judge said something that will stay with me forever. The evidence clearly shows that the plaintiffs explicitly told their daughter to permanently remove herself from their lives, then pursued legal action when she honored that request. This court finds their claims to be without merit and their behavior toward the defendant to be reprehensible. As we left the courthouse, my family tried to approach me one last time. Robert stepped forward with tears in his eyes. "Sarah, please," he said. "We're family. We made mistakes, but we're still family." I looked at him for a long moment, then at Linda and Madison standing behind him. They all looked broken and desperate and sorry, but not because they'd hurt me. They were sorry because their cruelty had finally cost them something they couldn't afford to lose. "No," I said quietly. "We're not family. You made that very clear 3 years ago when you told me the greatest gift I could give you was to disappear forever. I gave you that gift, and I'm not taking it back." Madison started to cry then, real tears instead of her usual manipulative ones. "I was wrong," she sobbed. "I was jealous and stupid and wrong. Please, Sarah, I'm sorry." "I'm sure you are," I replied. "Sorry that your actions had consequences. Sorry that treating people badly actually cost you something in the end. But you're not sorry for what you did to me. You're just sorry you got caught." I turned to walk away, then stopped and looked back one more time. 3 years ago, you told me I brought negativity wherever I went. You said I was difficult and that everyone would be happier without me. You may have been right about the first part, but the negativity wasn't coming from me. It was coming from how you treated me. And now you get to live with the consequences of that treatment forever. Patricia and I walked away, leaving them standing there in the courthouse parking lot. I could hear Madison still crying behind me, and Linda calling my name, but I didn't look back. That evening, I called Marcus and told him everything. We'd already planned to get married next spring, but after everything that had happened, I wanted to move the timeline up. Life is too short to wait for happiness, and I'd already wasted too many years trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. We're getting married next month in a small ceremony overlooking the Sound. My grandfather's best friend, who reached out to me after the inheritance and has become like a surrogate grandfather, will walk me down the aisle. Jessica will be my maid of honor. My chosen family will be there to celebrate with us. My biological family will not be invited. They burned that bridge 4 years ago when they told me to disappear, and I'm not rebuilding it just because they've finally realized what they lost. The house they'll probably have to sell to pay the judgment? I might buy it. Not to live in. I have no desire to go back to that place, but as an investment property. There's something poetic about the idea of profiting from the final collapse of their financial stability. Some people might call me vindictive for pursuing the lawsuit instead of just moving on with my life. They might say I should have been the bigger person and forgiven them. But here's the thing, I did move on with my life. I built something beautiful and peaceful and filled with people who actually care about me. They're the ones who couldn't move on. They're the ones who decided that having me out of their lives wasn't enough. They also needed to profit from my absence by taking the inheritance my grandfather left me. They're the ones who dragged me back into their drama with lies and legal manipulation. I didn't seek revenge. I sought justice. And sometimes, those two things look exactly the same. The best revenge, it turns out, isn't plotting and scheming to hurt the people who hurt you. The best revenge is building a life so amazing that their absence from it becomes their punishment. The best revenge is being so genuinely happy without them that their attempts to drag you back down just highlight how much better off you are without them. My family wanted me to disappear forever, and I gave them exactly what they asked for. They just never expected that granting their wish would cost them everything they actually valued. But that's the thing about consequences, they don't care about your intentions. They only care about your actions. And my family's actions spoke loud and clear. Update: it's been 2 weeks since the court ruling, and I've received exactly what I expected, nothing. No attempts at contact, no more letters from lawyers, no dramatic gestures. It's like they finally accepted that the bridge is burned beyond repair. The silence is peaceful in a way that I never expected. For almost 4 years, there was always this underlying tension, this knowledge that they might reach out or try to insert themselves back into my life. Now that possibility is gone, sealed shut by a judge's ruling and their own inability to accept responsibility for their actions. Marcus and I went house hunting last weekend and found the perfect place for starting our married life. It's nothing like the house I grew up in, it's warm and bright, with big windows and space for the family we want to build together. A family based on love and respect rather than obligation and conditional affection. I'm finally free, and it feels exactly like coming home.